Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to What's Growing On. And with me, as always, is Terrence Lanier with Victory Teaching Farm down here in Mobile. Hey, Terrence, good to see you.
Hey, good morning.
And today we're going to be talking about, or you're going to be talking about, a weed-free garden. And I found this really interesting as I was working on this. What the information you sent me is really cool. It's like not all weeds are evil, so that's a good thing to know. So anyway, I guess without further ado, we can just go ahead and get started. So we're going to start with what's wrong with weeds, because
Yep.
most of us think that all weeds are bad. So
Yeah.
let's talk about that.
Okay. Well, the thing that's wrong with weeds is when they're in your garden or in your lawn or in your landscaping, they are competing for sunlight, they're competing for water, and they're competing for nutrients. So the things that you have intentionally planted may not thrive as well as they would if they did not have the uninvited guest of weeds. The other thing about weeds is they can also harbor pests and diseases that can infect your intentional plantings. And then with most, they produce large amounts of seeds because that's kind of their goal in life is to constantly spread and reproduce. And so they produce massive amounts of seeds, which is why weeds are a thorn in your side a lot of the times because they produce so many seeds that they reproduce so quickly and so often that it makes them a big problem.
Okay, so good to know. So we and this is kind of stuff that we all, I think, probably get an idea of, and how they're, really, more pesky than anything. But we're also going to talk about what's right with weeds. So Terrence, tell us what weeds are good for.
So, like you said, not all weeds are bad. And it just depends on the particular weed. Many of them are edible and full of nutrients. And they can also attract beneficial insects to your garden. And so we'll kind of go into depth a little bit about which ones are edible and, which ones can attract beneficial insects to your garden. But a lot of times you want to keep those weeds around or at least kind of strategically clear out in certain areas and leave certain areas with the weeds.
Awesome. Okay, and so next we're going to talk a little bit about the three common types of weeds, or I'm sorry, the common types of weeds. There's more than just three, obviously, but
Oh,
Karen,
yeah.
tell us a little bit about these guys here.
Okay, and so these I picked, and there's many, many, many more varieties of weeds, depending on where you are in the United States, where you are in the state. But these are just some common types that I was more familiar with. So we're going to start with crabgrass. And let me preface as we talk about this, excuse me, some of these are edible. And I'll mention some of that, but if you are going to forage your weeds for edible weeds to, bring into your kitchen, please know exactly what you're, be knowledgeable. Make sure you
Mhm.
know that the weed, because lots of weeds resemble other weeds. Some can be poisonous, and some, again, can be packed full of nutrients, and you can eat every single part of it from the root to the flower. So again, if you're going to, and some of these I think people are pretty familiar with, and they'll know exactly what it is. It's like dandelions. Everybody pretty much
Right.
knows what a dandelion looks like. And so, again, just, if you're going to forage your weeds to eat, make sure that you know that what you're picking is what you know that you're picking. So,
Right.
I'm going to start with crabgrass, and exactly what it says it is grass, and it will take over your garden. It grows roots that are stem-like, and they spread and spread and spread. So crabgrass can quickly take over your garden and even your lawn as well. I'm gonna jump around to some of these.
Sure.
Tawana says pesky weeds. Yes, they can be pesky, especially
Yes.
crabgrass.
Yes.
So the next one I'm going to talk about is, and let me see, I'm going to try to go in order. So we'll talk about lamb's quarters. All right, this is one that is edible. So they're actually high in fiber, protein, loaded with vitamins A and C. They're high in magnesium, calcium, copper, iron, and omega 3 and omega 6 fatty acids. Yes,
Wow.
a
So
weed.
so
So
lamb's quarters is edible and healthy for you.
they they are, and
And
go ahead, Dorothy. Sorry.
I was going to no, we had a really good question from Bill Hawkins. Why do we consider them weeds when they have nutritional and other values when they're edible? Do we have any idea on that? Is it kind of like an old marketing ploy or some idea of that?
Bill, that is a great question, and I can follow up on that. But I did not research the history of why we call weeds weeds. But that is a fantastic question because,
Yeah,
the term weed we consider as a negative term. But like you
right.
said, if they're healthy and nutritious and attract beneficial insects, then and maybe just the word weed, there's just a negative connotation with it, and really
Mhm.
it's not a negative thing always. So but yeah, that was a great question.
Yeah, that
You
is a
stumped
great
me though.
question. We'll have to study that one, Bill. Thank you.
Yeah. So the lamb's quarters, they kind of have scalloped triangular leaves, and the underside of them are gray. So that's kind of how you can identify those in your garden. And usually we know if it's not something that we've planted, then it has to be some type of weed. And then just identifying them, there's
Mhm.
tons of resources on the internet to identify, um, weeds by,
Yeah.
pictures.
And I just did a quick internet search on my phone, and and for a weed is any plant that's not supposed to be there or is unwanted.
Ah,
And so it says
okay.
a plant that you might cultivate in your garden can also become a weed if it escapes the garden or the field that it's supposed to be in. So
Okay.
I guess it's any rogue plant that you don't intend it to be there. So
Right. Yeah,
anyway,
kind of like what I guess I answered your question, Bill.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, we if we
You
didn't plant it in our garden, then it's probably a weed.
absolutely spot on, spot on. All right, great. Sorry about that. Moving on,
Yeah,
but
no,
that
that's
was a great question, Bill, and that was a great answer, Terrence. So you were
and
right
thank
on the
you,
money.
Dorothy, for doing the research real quick as well.
Sure, sure. The powers of the internet.
Yes. So we're gonna move on to dollar weed. Oh, dollar weed. It gave us our run from our money at the farm. It's also known as pennywort, and that may be a more common name, but it's little round leaves, little round dark green leaves. And believe it or not, the stems, the leaves, and the roots are edible, and they taste kind of like a mixture of wheatgrass, parsley, and cucumber. But they are a very, very, oh, how do I say, rapidly growing, intense weed. They will take over. And they did. They took over a lot of our raised beds before we could. I mean, they literally become big mats, and we were
Mhm,
literally rolling the soil like you'd roll up a carpet. We were
mhm.
rolling the soil up in our raised beds and having to go underneath and pull
Wow.
out the weeds because the roots are almost long and white and spaghetti like. And I
Mhm.
mean, when we would pull some of them out, I mean, these root systems would be like 15, 20 feet long.
Wow.
So you definitely want to make sure that you get those out ASAP because they are really hardcore when they
Yeah.
get in your garden and your lawn too. They
Yeah.
can take over your lawn in a heartbeat as well.
Yeah. Wow.
So, all right, chickweed. I'm going to move on to that one. So,
Sure.
another edible. It can be eaten raw or cooked. You can use the fresh flowers and toss them into salads, stir fries, stews, or pestos. Um, these also create kind of a lush green mat, and they have little small star shaped kind of flowers.
Hmm.
But again, it's a weed and it will take over. It will take over your garden. Purslane. This is another, and it is also an edible. the leaves, the stems, and the flowers. Um, you always want to wash any of these weeds very carefully, just
Hmm.
to get any dirt and sand or anything off of it. And then if you use any type of chemical sprays on your lawn or in your garden, you definitely want to wash to get that surface chemical off. But purslane is also one that's an edible, and that's the picture of it is the far right with the white
Hmm.
background. That's the purslane. And actually, we had a when we had one of our uh, fundraisers at the farm. One of our chefs, we had purslane growing wild at the farm, and he used it in one of his dishes.
Huh.
And it's kind of a salty-ish tart kind of
Huh.
flavor. But it was delicious. I will have to admit, it was kind of weird, knowing that it was a weed growing wild at the farm,
Yeah.
and we picked it for him, and he took it and created this fabulous gourmet dish with it. But it was really good. So
Yeah. And it's pretty too. It actually kind of looks like a herb if especially from the picture there. Um,
yeah, it
it,
does. It does.
mm,
Um, and some of them have little flowers on them, small yellow flowers. So
huh.
that they're very pretty. I think they're a real pretty weed. Again, they're edible, but they also will take over because they're very stemmy.
Mm-hmm.
They create long kind of vining type you know stems to them.
Right.
Okay, so dandelion. I think this is one that most everyone's familiar with, and this is one that is also edible. And people make dandelion tea out of the roots, or dandelion coffee. The dandelion greens, people eat those in salads, or you can saute them. You can cook the flower heads, and you can even bake with the petals. So it's a completely edible. It's also a beneficial plant. It invites specifically bees, but it invites those beneficials to your garden, and they're very pretty. The thing is, though, is once those flowers go to seed, they become those little white puffy
Hmm.
plants that you always make a wish on. You pick
Yep.
it up and blow it and make a wish, and then all these little white seeds fly through the
Yep.
air. So once the dandelion goes to that point, then you've got a seed head, and they're going to spread, spread, spread. So I think dandelions are beautiful in the garden. I think that since they attract beneficials, you want to leave them, but you just want to make sure that they don't encroach upon, your
Right.
intended plants. So,
Okay.
all right. So moving on over to pigweed. Um,
What
also,
a name.
I know. I know. So pigweed and chickweed and lamb's quarters. There's kind of a crabgrass. There's kind of a
Yeah.
theme here.
Yeah.
So the leaves of pigweed are also incredibly nutrition. They're high in vitamin A and C and folate and calcium. And fun fact, in Jamaica, it's known as callaloo, and it is a culinary staple.
Really?
Um,
Wow.
yes, 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 yes. But they get to be very, very tall, and they have a big tap root. And they have a really hairy looking cluster of kind of greenish flowers on them. So that's kind of a
Hmm.
way to identify them. But again, another weed that is
Hmm.
healthy for you and eaten on the regular in other places around the country.
That's cool.
All right, clover. I know everybody should be familiar with clover as well. And clover, I always trying to find the four leaf clover. And we have found them before. It's supposed to be considered lucky to find a four-leaf clover. But clover can definitely take over and spread. And clover typically, where it grows, so clover is very beneficial to your soil because it puts nitrogen back in the soil. And typically, where clover grows, it grows there because it how do I say this without making it sound like it has a human mind, but it will grow in places where it knows that there's nutrients needed.
Yeah.
And they replenish that in your soil. So clover actually is something great to let grow if you have a dormant time for your garden, and you've got clover, you can let the clover grow and help it kind of replenish the soil. Um, and then just mow it down when you're ready, and it'll suppress the weeds, all the other weeds. So it's a
Okay.
weed that will suppress weeds. And it's good to keep in your garden until it's time to plant. And then you can just mow it down and go to town on your garden.
Wow, that's really good to know. So clover will actually put the nutrients back in the soil.
Yes, and again,
Okay.
it typically grows in places where there is that needed extra nitrogen or whatever.
Yeah.
But it can take
Okay.
over. It can take over your lawn.
Yeah.
Um, it can take over,
Right.
your garden space. But again, it's good as a cover crop. I wouldn't let it
Mhm.
take over my lawn.
Right.
I try to keep it cut down, but you can let it grow if you have an area in your garden that you're not planting in, for a period of time,
Sure.
and it'll actually be beneficial. And it also attracts beneficial insects, specifically bees and butterflies.
Perfect. Those good pollinators we need. So,
Yep,
okay. So that's really good to know. So dandelion and clover are kind of your garden's friends in different ways. So
they
good to
are.
know. Good to know. All right. So now let's say we've got some of those pesky weeds that Tawana was referring to that we want to control. So let's talk about how we can control weeds in our garden without using too many pesticides and such.
Right, and you can control weeds in your garden without using pesticides. I mean, we would,
Mhm.
do that at the farm. I do that at my home garden. But you have to be vigilant and you have to stay on top of it. And the
Right.
biggest thing is you need to pull them as soon as you see them.
Mhm.
Try not to let them go to seed. You've got that beautiful dandelion that we make a wish on down in the right hand corner, but that is all seeds. And once they get to that point, they start to spread. So you want to try to never let them go to seed. Um, mulch with straw or compost leaves. This is the time of the year where we're constantly raking leaves. Save those leaves and put them in your garden, and you can
Mhm.
mulch out. For one, the mulch will keep your soil temp
Mm,
warmer during the cold months because it kind of traps the heat in. So that helps your plants when we have those cold snaps. But the mulch will also kind of smother out the weeds. A big thing you need to do is when you buy new plants from your local garden center, or if you have a neighborhood plant sale, specifically like neighborhood plant sales, because usually these are where people are just picking things out of their own yards and bringing them to the neighborhood swap or whatever. You want to check for weeds in those plants before you plant them, and get those out before you even stick them in the ground. We talked about the cover crops, like buckwheat is one. That's typically something that's in a large field, but clover
mhm.
and things like that. You
Mhm.
can also garden in raised beds or containers, because you have a less likely chance of having weeds if you start from new with fresh, clean soil in a raised bed or a container. Also, maintaining healthy soil. And we talk about this all the time. The best way to do that is through regular composting. And then
Mhm.
you would just want to use the right tools to pull your weeds. And there's lots of tools on the market. We had a great one that we used for the dollar weed, and the name is escaping me right now. But there's lots of different tools that you can use
Mhm.
that kind of are specific to weed control. And you
Right.
can find a lot of that at your local garden center or online.
Excellent, excellent. And like you said, compost, we've talked about compost numerous occasions, as well as mulch, because they are, and compost can be mulch. It's so good for you. And compost too, like the leaves and stuff, compost can be virtually free for you. I mean, you just
Mhm.
basically, what is it, the old vegetable rinds, things like that you can,
Mhm.
eggshells, things like that, you just kind of put in a pile and kind of toss around, and
Yep,
makes its own glorious soil. So
it sure
that's
does.
really good to know. So and this is one of the things that I'm interested in learning about is you hear a lot about like landscape cover or weed cover. Tell us a little bit about maybe the pros and cons of using these to kind of help with the weed control.
Um, so honestly, for me, I shy away from landscape fabric and weed cloth and things like that. Just because eventually, like if you see on the right hand side, that's plastic, and
Mm-hmm.
I don't really like to use plastic. You
Right.
know, anything. I
Right.
try to reduce my use of plastic in any way, shape, or form that I can. But the thing about using the landscaping plastic and things like that, yes, it'll you know um, smother out those weeds, but eventually you're going to have to pull it out and replace it because it
Mm-hmm.
gets torn. It
Mm-hmm.
also reduces um, the water that's getting down into the soil, into the roots of the plants that are your intentional plants.
Mm-hmm.
The same thing with the weed cloth. A lot of times, it's more detrimental to the plants that you are trying to grow, because it's also kind of suppressing them. Even though you might cut a little hole for it to
Mm-hmm.
poke out, it's still kind of limiting it in its
Yeah.
growth and how its roots spread, and with water as well. And so, landscape fabric and weed cloth, I think, are good choices for walkways in between your garden or in
Right.
between your rows and things like that. But to use it, for your entire garden to eliminate
Mm-hmm.
weeds, you're best off using good old elbow grease and getting out there and pulling them when you see them.
Yeah. And honestly, I kind of enjoy doing that. I don't know what it is.
Oh, it's therapeutic.
Yeah, it's very therapeutic, it's in good ways, and it's good to get outdoors and just to kind of do that kind of stuff. So, thank you, Terrence. This has been really interesting to learn. I have experienced landscape fabric myself, and it's not fun to use. It's not fun to have to pull up is really where I was with it. But you're right. It can help with, certain walkways and such like that. But, yeah, that's really good to know. And, again, like you said, mulch, 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 and pull them as soon as you see them. I think those are probably the two best things to take away, if anything.
Yeah, and when you're in your garden and you're pulling those weeds, then that's a time also that you can take to kind of visually, inspect your plants and make sure that
Hmm.
there's no pest or
Yeah.
there's not any kind of other issues happening, or do they need more water, or,
Yep.
things like that. So, while you're out there weeding, you can kind of kill a few birds with a few stones, or
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. You can, or kill a few bugs.
or kill.
So,
Yeah, let's say that a
yeah.
few of those non-beneficial bugs.
Right. Right. Exactly. Exactly.
We want the
Well,
birds.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Terrence, thanks so much as always. And folks, we're going to be back October 8th, the first Wednesday of the month. Did I say October 8th or is it October 6th? My brain just left me. October 6th. I was wrong. October 6th, we'll be back at 10 a.m. Right here on Facebook and on YouTube. And we're going to be talking about some fun fall stuff. Is that right, Terrence?
Yes, some
Yes.
fun things to do to decorate, and they're all related to gardening.
Yes. So join us next time. That's going to be 10 o'clock on October 6th. And we've got a quick video to show you about all of our upcoming events. And Terrence, again, thanks so much, and we'll see you next month.
Thank you.